Welcome back to another episode of the 100% Wild Podcast. I'm Mark Kenyon here with Wired to Hunt. Matt Drury with me as well over on the other side of the internet, and I still can't say Tim's last name right either. So
Let me help you.
yeah.
Tim,
Matt, you better do the intro on that one.
how about Tim Chelsvik?
I was gonna say that. Chelsvik.
Yeah, Matt's got it down now.
Practice
That
makes
is-
perfect.
Sitting in front of a mirror saying it.
Chelsvik.
It's not that hard, I guess. I think it's when you see it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the problem. Just don't look at
Don't
it.
look at it because it will throw you.
Too many consonants. Always.
That's awesome.
Not
Well,
to offend you.
No, it's just my heritage. I mean, whatever.
Just whatever.
so we today are back to talk about deer, of course. But I have a little bit of news that I wanted to share to kick off this episode too, because there are going to be some changes coming up with the show. So me and Matt, you and me, Matt. This is like, I don't know, 2.5 years ago probably now when we first started talking about doing this show together.
Yep.
And it finally came together. And we've been doing it now for, I think we're right about at the 2-year mark, which is pretty awesome. But there are some new things going on with Wired to Hunt on my end, some really significant new business changes and projects. And because of that, I'm actually going to have to be transitioning away from this podcast, which is why I'm really excited that Tim is here with us. Tim Czechoslovakia, because I think he's going to...
Somehow you made it worse. Nice job.
So what I'm trying to say is that I'm going to be kind of moving in a different direction, and Tim's going to be hopping on board and filling my role, right, Matt?
Yeah, so of course, you and I talked about it probably a month or so back, and we had, through the month of January's trade show season, and then February on my end, with Critical Mass being early March, the filming, we had a bunch of production planning we were doing. And then subsequently on your end, you had this news that you just shared with us that you've been working on. And, we didn't get any podcasts out really and for the first couple months, maybe one or two, and I hated it. And so we regrouped, and that's when you shared with me the news. And of course, we hate to see you go, but we're happy for you that you have some new opportunities and a chance to expand your business and what all you're doing and who all you're reaching. I mean, that's the point of all this. That was the point of the collaboration to begin with, is to take two companies that kind of had their own things going and try to do a mashup for a while and combine forces. And I mean, I think it's been a win-win, at least on our end. I know that we've been so grateful for you and your help and showing us kind of the ropes in the podcast world. So I hate to see you go, but that doesn't mean it's the end of it either. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to have you on to the 100% Wild podcast. We're going to keep that name and that style of podcast at Drury Outdoors. And of course, you'll still have Wired to Hunt and many other cool projects going on. So
yeah, and I agree with what you said. It has been such a cool opportunity to be able to work together, and I've had so much fun, and I've appreciated that partnership so much. So yeah, you're not going to be able to get rid of me completely. I'm going to keep on trying to force my way in as a guest.
we'll
as
take
often
it
as
every
you
time,
let
man.
me.
We'll take it every time.
Well, and it's not it's a legit transition when someone says, like, got business stuff going on, as opposed to, I want to spend more time with my family. Whatever something happens with a
because that's
politician.
BS, you're saying?
Yeah, it's like something's up there. This is
going
legit.
on.
He
This
just
is
cheated
good.
on his wife.
Bad stuff.
Yeah,
happening.
no big deal.
So Tim,
Yeah.
Tim, his background, he's an outdoor writer. He has his own podcast called The Thinking Woodsman and website thinkingwoodsman.com. And Tim's been working with us for the last couple of years, helping us write our journal entries for our website. And we've worked more and more and more together, and we've done podcasts together on his podcast. And so, ultimately, I thought it was going to be not that he could replace you, but I think he will do a good job of setting the stage for us, much like you do every week, because he kind of understands the conservation side of things, publicly and hunting. I felt like it's a very similar approach. Granted, a different state, different location, but a very similar approach to just kind of all things media, much like yourself. So Tim will be kind of taking that role from, that pole position and setting the stage and allowing me to step in and just BS my way through a 30-minute episode like I do with you, Mark.
Make Matt look good.
Well,
that's
well,
the
good
whole
luck,
show
Tim.
we're saying.
It takes a lot of work to make Matt look good, so I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah. Well, we've been trying to do it on video for 2 decades. It didn't happen.
Oh no, it's gonna be great. And that said, though, you're stuck with me at least here for a little while longer, and we do have a good question today that rather than belabor this point any further, we could just get into the real meat and potatoes if you guys want.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
The question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter.
All right, and this one's actually a written-in question, so I'm going to read this one. The question goes like this, quote, I have a dog, and I enjoy hiking and scouting with him. It's been cool to see you, as in me, take my dog out with me, too, on scouting and shed hunting trips. So he asks, do you take your dog scouting? And if so, when do you stop taking him out there for fear of leaving too much scent in the woods? I struggle deciding when to cut her off from my scouting trips, end quote. So basically, I thought, we can talk about the specifics of the dog in the woods, but I also just thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about all the different things we do in the off season and how those may or may not impact us during hunting season. So what kind of stuff's okay, what kind of stuff maybe isn't, when should we be doing certain types of scouting or impacts on the property, when should we not? So that said, to his specific question about the dog, I take my dog out with me in the winter when I'm shed hunting. And I maybe sometimes will take him out with me in the summer, earlier in the summer, doing some, tree stand hanging work, that kind of stuff. But once you get close to the hunting season, everything gets pulled away. My scouting is much less intrusive. The dog running around is not happening anymore. I'm not going out there on joyrides with the family or anything like that. Once you get within a month of the hunting season, I completely pull out of the area and leave it, untouched. But I don't think in a lot of ways the off-season impact stuff matters too much as to how it will impact you on the hunting. But I do think things you do during the summer can impact things like your trail camera success. And trail camera inventory that you take during the summer, that can impact your success in the fall. So you do need to think about that. So, for example, if it's important to us, if we're saying that's important to get summer trail camera pictures of the mature bucks in your area so you know what's around, which I do think is important, then you do need to minimize your summer impacts, because if you're out there tromping around doing crazy stuff, you're not going to get those pictures. So I'm very careful about where I do travel or scout in the summer so as to not impact those bucks too much. So I'm not going back in bedding areas other than maybe the few times I have to hang tree stands for the rut. I'm not going in and walking all over the property. I minimize my intrusion as much as possible. So, we kind of talked about this in one of our previous episodes when it comes to like when you're hanging your stands and stuff. I try to make sure that when I do those days where I'm hanging stands or scouting, that I get as much packed into like that one day as I possibly can. So rather than going out 7 times and working for a couple hours at a time, I'd rather do one day for 12 hours versus splitting that up over many different days. I think that increases the impact and impacts those deer more. So then to the trail camera work, I am placing those on edges, near food sources or near some kind of maybe summer water source, but somewhere that I can easily access, get in and out, hopefully like on a 4-wheeler or something without leaving a lot of scent, without walking around a lot. That again just is not impacting or educating those deer too much, so they feel comfortable coming out to that camera location where I can get those summer pictures. So yeah, I don't want my dog running through bedding areas and all over the place at that time of year as well. So those are a few of the first things I thought about when it came to this question. Tim, Matt, anything you want to jump on that first part?
Yeah, well, I'm not a dog owner. Of course, my family, we own dogs, but they're inside dogs and smaller dogs, and I'm not a lab guy or whatever, where you take the dog everywhere you go. I know like every guy at Mossy Oak owns a dog, right? And they're in the office, they're in the truck, they're everywhere they go, and that's just not Mark, Terry. That's not us. If you were to ask those guys or anybody that's followed us knows that our history with dogs, especially on Dad's farm, it's like it's a negative view of dogs on farms. That being said, I realize there's a ton of dog owners out there that it's man's best friend, right? And they go everywhere with them. So, I think you hit on it. When you're going, it's not that intrusive. You're not doing it a lot, and you're very careful about what time of year you're doing it. So, me personally, I would never bring a dog on the farm, but I don't own a dog. So, that's just the mentality, right? So, it's skewed one way. Now, the rest of the question there, what you kind of parlayed it into, something like trail cameras and putting out trail cameras and intrusion in the summer leading into the fall. Mark he leaves his trail cameras out all year round on his farm, and always has, and his farm is very low pressure. It's all year. So like you see a deer, he calls them residents and non-residents, because if they take off running, he said it's a non-resident deer that came from somebody else's farm. But if they stay there, just stare at him as he drives by on his electric deal or whatever, he said that they're a resident. They're used to him. He's kind of like that old farmer, that says, they don't care about that truck. Yeah, you know what I mean? That tractor don't scare him. Well, that's Dad. He's on the property all the time. You know what I mean? He's old man winter, just kind of bebopping through the farm. That being said, he never tips into the timber. Like, you do not, outside of turkey season and shed hunting, the dude does not leave his, what we call the fairways, because he mows, he's got like a cart path basically right in the middle of all the fields and everything, and he keeps it mowed, and it looks like a fairway.
It's manicured.
It's manicured. Well, now, so Dad's cameras are out all year, and he'll start checking them more heavily, come July. Mark, on the other hand, he'll pull his cameras every year, and he puts them back out like second week of July, or starts somewhere in that time frame. And from there, Mark's like, both of them are like the kings of non-intrusion. Like, they don't believe in being on the property, being inside the property, having other people on the property. I mean, they're just like crazy anal about it, and and I think that's been their recipe for success. That doesn't mean that it's everybody's. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way. But I know personally, when I was on my lease way more last year, doing more work, thinking I was really doing something for the property, putting in more food, more stands, setting it up the way I wanted it to, we had less deer that fall, so like there's definitely was and Dad just kept saying, he's like, man, I think you just put too much intrusion on it. And, so right or wrong, I don't know. I had to get the food in. I had to get the stands in. But could my timing have been different? To your point, could I have done one long day, a 12-hour day, instead of going up, 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 weeks in a row, for 3 or 4 hours? Probably so. That probably would have made a difference, and got it done early and got out and stayed out. So, I think there's a real fine line. I think it depends on your deer herd. I think it depends on your neighbors. I think it depends on if you're like on a lease and what your farmer's doing. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. And every herd is different. Every farm, and Mark and Terry talk about all the time, has their own DNA. And you really got to figure out what the DNA of your farm is, and work towards that more than anything. So mine, I know, honestly, like, it's not the greatest until the week of the rut. Mm-hmm. Every year, every mature buck I got, we can see during that week. But in the early season, it's just, if you're going to see them, it's going to be right at last light if you're lucky. You know what I mean? So going way back to the intrusion part, why kill yourself going in there over and over checking cameras, when now 3 years later, like, I know I'm not going to have very good luck in the early season there. So why keep forcing the issue? Yep. So I think that goes to the intrusion point as well.
Yeah, I think it's a classic case of less is more. I try to stay off as much as I can. Not everyone has that capability. Some people, their property is also their recreational property, and they've got family, and they want to take the four-wheelers around. And I think you also have to consider, what's the baseline level of activity that the deer see, because it's different. It's different for a piece of public land that's near a major interstate versus a farm that's tucked back in a very rural area. There's a different level of agitation, of intervention that deer are going to be used to and are going to tolerate. There's a property I hunted last year. I got a public land draw for a place called Forest 44 Conservation Area here in Missouri, right along Highway 44. And there are people that are walking and bringing their dogs. There are horseback riders through there. And those deer have a way different level of comfort with people and dogs than they do on my farm down in Bourbon, Missouri. So you just have to recognize each property is different. The deer there are different because they live in different circumstances. But less is more. Especially dogs. And I've killed deer. I've seen dogs on a property I was hunting, and I've killed deer that same day. It happens. It's possible, but would I have preferred those dogs not have been there in the first place? Absolutely. So it doesn't necessarily spoil a hunt or spoil your season, but doesn't help it.
No. Yeah, it's funny. The very first deer I ever killed was on my family's 3-acre yard property where I grew up.
Come past the swing set.
Yeah. I was hunting. It was all wooded, and I was hunting in the back, and 2 people came walking through with their dog across my family's 3-acre property, and I was so mad. I stormed out. I was in the ground blind, and I'm a teenager, and I storm out of the ground blind. I'm like, "You're on private property.
Jerks.
You're ruining my hunt." I was really upset. And they ended up, turning around, going back the other way, and I thought that my hunt was ruined. And then, lo and behold, hour later, here comes this buck and got my first deer.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I would agree with what you said, Tim. There are lots of situations where someone might have some land that they hunt, but they also want to use it for other things too. Like you said, maybe it's the family part. It's a place for the kids to come out and ride their bikes or their 4-wheelers or whatever it might be. Camping. Whatever. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I just think that 2 things. Number one, you need to adjust maybe your expectations from a deer hunting standpoint. Then if you want to do these other things, which is great, just realize that they will have some kind of impact on your deer hunting, and just understand that. And if you're okay with it, you're okay with that. That's great. Mm-hmm. But then number 2, there are ways to minimize that a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about timing again. Maybe you just make sure that the family ATV stuff stops in August or whatever it might be. Or you might say, okay, here's these areas of the property where we're going to keep all of that activity. So the biking or the camping or the 4-wheeling or the dog walking, that's only going to happen on this front quarter of the property along the field or whatever it might be. If there's ways that you can relegate that kind of activity to one section so that, to your point, Tim, the deer can establish a baseline of activity there, but it does not impact them in these other areas, they can then develop a comfort level knowing, okay, yeah, there's going to be this human activity out on the edge here that is normal. But as long as that normalcy isn't broken by someone, Tristan through the bedding area too often, I think then you can still have some consistent deer activity then, as long as you're not violating those protected areas. So I think there's ways to make it all work. You just need to be kind of smart about it, adjust your expectations, and do your best to keep the impact as small as possible, or relegate to certain sections as much as possible. Right. And then I think in those cases, you'll be all right. Well,
and there's another layer to this too. But we talk about deer, but we know that there's like deer, and then there's mature deer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what a mature deer is willing to tolerate is definitely different than what a doe or a younger buck is going to tolerate. So when you talk about adjusting expectations, Mark, I think that's part of it also, is that you may be able to kill some deer if you have a fair amount of human activity, but your likelihood of killing a good mature buck is definitely going to wane with increased human or canine pressure.
Agreed. And keep those dogs on their leashes in your yards and off of Terry Drew's property.
That's right. For God's sake, please. He's getting older. He's getting more senile. He just can't handle it. Please keep your dogs off his farm.
All right, guys. Is there anything else you want to touch on this one?
No, I think we covered it, man.
Awesome. Well, then I will let you, Matt, give us the updates as far as where they can find things in the future for the video side.
Yeah, so for the video, especially if you're listening to this audio version over on Mark Kenyon's Stitcher or iTunes channels, you can always watch us over on Drury Outdoors YouTube channel, and where we have tons of other great content there, of course, timely content, informational stuff, tips, tactics, and everything in between. And going forward, we're working on it currently, but going forward, the plan is for us to create a Stitcher page and an iTunes page for the 100% Wild podcast under the Drury Outdoors umbrella. And moving forward, you'll still be able to get the audio version as well. So thankfully, Mark's been very generous and kind of trying to help us out and move towards those goals. And like we said, there'll be a couple episode transitional period here. And then at some point, we're going to jump feet first into the podcast world of Drury Outdoors and put our big boy pants on and try to do it on our own.
Yeah, so if you want to listen to a train wreck to see what that sounds like.
We'll give you a heads up
tuned.
on the first one Mark's not on, and it should be a freaking dumpster fire.
I'm going to be tuned in for that for sure. All right, guys. And just as an FYI, too, you can continue to follow my stuff over at Wired to Hunt and the Wired Hunt podcast and whatnot. And we'll be keeping everyone posted on the new stuff to come, too. So that's all said. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. It's been a blast.
Peace.
See ya.